Oh,
Okay, got you on the line. Just hang there. We'll start in about 5 minutes.
okay.
Okay.
Halfway through the first season. Yeah. I'm more of an assistant coach. Well, it's my way. Like, I have different, we both have different philosophies of how we work on, like, head coaches. Depending on who's talking at the time. Yeah, we have different philosophies. If she wants the fullback to take the throw, and I want the midfielder to take the throw. And I'm like, see the fullback not getting back, and we get a goal scored on us. That's your fault. Yeah. It's like, what's going on with your team?
You gotta avoid saying "I told you so." I never tried to do that.
But I think the girls have it.
That's a fun age. Not too much stress, not too much pressure. Like you win, great. You lose, you're over it.
Right. There is a difference between the girls and the boys. It impacts the same much.
I've done both. Both sides.
Sorry, I was chatting. I was actually chatting with you. The ding.
This is a new one.
Yeah, that's good.
Get this stuff out of his car.
Well, we may be a minute early, but I'm rolling. Okay.
Hey, bro.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Print signal, right?
I'm David Barish, the chairman of the Gaming Control Board. Before we begin, I'd like to ask everyone to please turn off or put on silent their electronic devices. What you hear in the background is, I believe, Commissioner Santoni, who's stuck someplace between Reading and Harrisburg behind a overturned tractor trailer. I think that was the sound of his door open air closing. But Dante is part of us is part of the group, so he's part of the quorum for this morning. Morning, Dante.
Good morning, everyone.
Okay. With us today is George Augusto, representing Russell Redding, the Secretary of Agriculture, Jen Langen, representing Joe Torsella, State Treasurer, and Bob Coyne, representing Secretary of Revenue, Dan Hassel. Thank you all for being here. The quorum of the board being present and on the phone, I'll call today's meetings to order. First, the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
By way of announcements, the board held an executive session yesterday, October 3rd, to discuss personnel matters and to conduct quasi-judicial deliberations relating to matters being considered by the board today. Next, I'd like to have consideration of a motion to approve the minutes and transcripts of the August 9th meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the minutes and transcript of the August 9th, 2017 meeting.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Before we proceed, I'd just like to comment, I did say last time was likely to be Commissioner Ryan's last meeting. I'm happy to see he is still among us.
I refuse to leave.
They're sending in the flight attendants from the United Airlines to drag him out of the room.
It's not going to help.
Okay. At any rate, any other comments at this point?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was on the phone last time and didn't have a chance to comment briefly on Commissioner Ryan being with us and soon to be not with us. I'd just like to say a couple words about Bill. A lot of folks don't realize that he is really completing 30 years of very senior public service here to the citizens of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Elected in 1987 as a district attorney of Delaware County, he served 2 terms. It's the only county of the 67 in our Commonwealth that has a term limit, and so he could only serve 2. He was in private practice for a year, and then when Mike Fisher was elected the Attorney General, Mike asked him to come to Harrisburg to head up the criminal division side of the AG shop. When General Fisher moved over to the 3rd United States Circuit Court of Appeals and his first deputy, Jerry Papert, became the Attorney General, he asked Commissioner Ryan if he would be the first deputy. He served as first deputy both to General Papert and for many years to Tom Corbett, General Corbett, when Tom was the Attorney General, and then left at the end of, actually was the acting Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and then came as the governor's appointment then by Governor Corbett as the chairman of the Gaming Commission. So, Bill, your service, noted, very significant for the citizens of this Commonwealth. It's been an honor to have served with you and to have the benefit of your counsel and the pleasure of your company. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dick, for those kind words coming from someone of your stature from the other side of the state. I certainly appreciate it.
All right, then, we will proceed. And if you're still here next time, we probably don't have any further eulogies, Bill. We've run out of eulogies.
I'll give another one.
I might have an addendum.
Okay. All right, under new business, Kevin O'Toole.
Good morning, Chairman Barish. Good morning, members of the board. On or about October 1st of every year, the board issues several key reports. In a subsequent meeting, we'll talk a little bit about our diversity report that is expected to be issued this week. But today, at the Executive Director's report, I would like to give some emphasis to the fact that we have recently issued our 12th annual report of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. It's in a bright red color this year. And the points that I would like to make is that it really does further a tradition of the Gaming Control Board to issue an outstanding annual report, one that is full of information that is useful in a lot of different contexts. It provides narrative summaries of all of our bureaus and offices as to how they fulfill their part of the mission of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. It provides charts and graphs of the accomplishments that can be put in a statistical format. It includes a statement of revenue and expenditures prepared by our Bureau of Financial Management. It contains detailed information about all 12 of the operating casinos in Pennsylvania, which includes information regarding the revenues in the past fiscal year and the taxes that those casinos have paid to the Commonwealth during that past fiscal year. It's always important to note that not from the beginning, but about 5 or 6 years ago, we began including a log of executive sessions. So this report contains our log for fiscal year 16-17. It provides the date of each executive session held by the Gaming Control Board, and it identifies a link within our web page where you can go and access the agenda for that executive session. I also like to make the comment that within the annual report is a description of our Speakers Bureau. The Speakers Bureau is coordinated by our Office of Communications through Doug Harbach, Richard McGarvey, Doreen Edwards. In this past fiscal year, they scheduled and appeared at approximately 40 speaking engagements, many of which the commissioners accompany the Office of Communication. We're very appreciative of the effort by the commissioners to participate in that activity. It's an outstanding opportunity to exchange ideas and perspectives with residents of the Commonwealth, with community and business groups, to give them a better perspective on the casino industry in Pennsylvania and the regulatory oversight of that industry. So our full annual report can be accessed by the public on our webpage at gamingcontrolboard.pa.gov. That's my report for today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Kevin. Any comments or questions? Dave Wren, Office of Financial Management.
Good morning.
Morning.
Today I have 2 points of discussion. The first is an overview of the board's expenditures for the first quarter of the fiscal year, and the second is a presentation of the proposed 2018-19 fiscal year budget. So with that, a brief summary of the first quarter expenses. During the first quarter, expenses totaled $8.1 million. Expenditures increased by 126%, or $126,000, or 1.6% from last year. 90% of expenses for the first quarter were for payroll, which totaled $7.3 million. This was up 3.9%, or $274,000 from last year. Salaries and overtime totaled $4.3 million, and benefits totaled $3 million. Benefit expenses as a percentage of salaries increased slightly to 71% from salaries this year from 70% last year. Operating and fixed assets expenditures combined totaled $821,000, or 10% of overall expenses. This is down $148,000, or 15% from the same quarter last year. The decrease is simply a result of timing differences as we are early in the fiscal year. The top three operating and fixed asset expenses were rentals and leases, which totaled $379,000. Services, including fees for fingerprints used in background investigations, at $133,000, and telecommunications expenses at $104,000. Unless there are any questions, I'll discuss the 18-19 budget.
Please proceed.
Next for your consideration is the proposed fiscal year 2018-19 budget request. The proposed request is $42,015,000 for administration and $2 million for statutorily mandated local law enforcement grants. Overall, the budget request is $350,000, or 0.8% higher than the current year budget. The increase is principally the result of hiring new staff for the potential opening of a new casino during the fiscal year and salary increases for current staff. The board's budget includes $36.8 million for personnel and benefits and $5.3 million for operating and fixed asset expenses. Personnel expenses comprise 87% of the overall budget and include funding for 295 positions. The benefit rate is equivalent to 71.9% of salary expenses. The operating fixed asset budget is $5.3 million, or 13% of the overall request. A majority of these expenditures will be for real estate leases, investigative expenses, and telecommunications and data costs. The proposed budget would be funded through a combination of $6.5 million in restricted revenue, including application license fees and chargebacks of gaming lab costs to manufacturers, and $35,515,000 in drawdowns from escrow accounts funded by casino operators. That concludes my presentation of the budget. I'd be happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I would appreciate your consideration of a motion to approve the 2018-19 budget request.
Any questions from Dave from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the 2018-19 proposed budget request as described by the Office of Financial Management.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed? Motion's adopted.
Mr. Chairman, if I can have one question of Mr. Rent. Dave, going back to the fiscal year just ended June 30th, I would assume that most of the transactions have been taken care of and the wrap is close to being put on the past fiscal year. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, we're tying up some loose ends this month, but by the end of the month we should be complete.
And did the board come in under budget during that year?
We should have a surplus or a lapse of about $1.1 million.
And that's, as I understand it, even with a cost of about $500,000 for computers that we all expect is, if not one time, certainly an expenditure that won't be repeated in the next fiscal year, correct?
That's correct. A large portion of the savings were due to declines in our complement levels from the prior year when we were setting last year's budget.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Office of Chief Counsel, Doug.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Our first agenda item relates to a local law enforcement grant, which Assistant Chief Counsel Denise Miller-Schutte is here to present.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The application that is before you today is for Chester County District Attorney's Office. They have submitted an application requesting a 2-year grant for a total of $442,089. Year 1 would be $230,145, and year 2 for $211,944. This would be the second grant if the board were to award it. They intend to use the grant fund to continue its established gaming initiative. The focus will be on identifying and investigating and prosecuting unlawful gaming devices, bookmaking, unlawful lotteries, dice games, and dog and cockfighting. The grant will be used, as in the past, will be used for the payment of one salary for a full-time investigator, a part-time investigator, training for the investigators and prosecutors, surveillance equipment, and the costs of their audits. Their application does meet the technical guidelines of the board, and it is now ready for your consideration.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the local law enforcement grant application of the Chester County District Attorney's Office as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today we have 2 petitions before you for consideration. Each of the matters can be decided on the documents of record as they are uncontested. For each of the matters, the board has, in advance of this meeting, been provided with a petition, OEC's answer, as well as any evidentiary materials filed of record. The first petition before the board is that of Carrie Dodson, and it's her petition for removal from the involuntary exclusion list. On January 3rd, 2015, Ms. Dodson, who was under the age of 21 at the time, attempted to enter Valley Forge's gaming floor by using a fake identification to try to obtain a casino access pass. As a result of the incident, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place her on the exclusion list. She did not respond, and the board issued an order on July 13th, 2016, placing her on the exclusion list for at least 1 year from the date of the board's order. It's now been over a year since she was placed on the list, and she's now 22 years of age and has requested removal. OEC has not objected to the removal, and it's her petition now that's before the board for approval.
Thanks, Doug. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant Carrie Dotson's petition for removal from the involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The second petition before the board is Vincent Procopio's request to be removed from the exclusion list. By way of background, in 2009, Mr. Procopio pled guilty to charges resulting from his part in an illegal sports betting ring operating out of the poker room at the Borgata Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City. Subsequently, in 2011, Mr. Procopio was placed on New Jersey's exclusion list. As a result of the conviction and upon verification that Mr. Procopio frequented Pennsylvania's casinos, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place him on our exclusion list. In February 2012, a hearing was held and a report and recommendation issued by a board hearing officer recommending that Mr. Procopio be placed on the exclusion list. On May 2nd, 2012, the board adopted that recommendation and placed Mr. Procopio on the board's involuntary exclusion list. On July 27, 2017, counsel for Mr. Procopio filed a petition requesting his removal from the exclusion list. The request avers that Mr. Procopio was released from prison for good behavior after serving 7 months out of a almost 1 year sentence, that his 5-year probation was terminated after 3 years, that he's been removed from the New Jersey exclusion list, that he has not had any contact with law enforcement authorities since 2008, and that he's complied with all requirements placed on him as a result of being on the board's exclusion list. He also provided letters attesting to his rehabilitation and character. It's now been over 5 years since he was placed on the list by this board, and having no evidence that he has violated the board's order, OEC has not objected to the request to remove him from the exclusion list. And for the record, the board's regulations allow a person to be placed on the exclusion list to request removal after 5 years, and that's what this request is. And with that explanation, it's ready for the board's consideration.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board grant Vincent Procopio's petition for removal from the involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next, presenting withdrawals and one report and recommendation is Deputy Chief Counsel Steve Cook.
Morning.
Good morning, Steve.
The board has received several unopposed petitions to withdraw applications or surrender the credentials of the following individuals and entities: Rosemary Williams, Thomas Traeger, Elite Casino Marketing Group, Inc., James Darrell Owen, Jacob Rothwangel, Karen Joyce Tajan, Jacqueline Beto, Richard A. Ditton, 2014 Special Trust, and Jess M. Ravitch. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has no objection to any of these petitions, and as a result, if the board were to grant same, they'd be doing so in each case without prejudice to the various requesters. And these matters are now ripe for your consideration.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue orders to approve the withdrawals and surrenders as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next before the board today for consideration is one report and recommendation received from the Office of Hearings and Appeals. The report and recommendation, which pertains to the emergency suspension of Samantha Klein's gaming employee occupation permit, was forwarded to the board, along with the complete evidentiary record in the matter prior to today's meeting. Additionally, Ms. Klein has been notified that the board would be taking the matter up today and that if she wanted to come forward to briefly address the board, she had the right to do so. If Ms. Klein is present in the room today, I'd ask her to come forward at this time. Briefly, Ms. Klein was issued a gaming employee permit in June of 2016 and worked as a security officer at Sugar House Casino. On July 6, 2017, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for emergency suspension of Ms. Klein's permit after receiving notice that she'd been arrested and charged with several offenses, including a felony charge for aggravated assault on a police officer. Specifically, it is alleged that on June 9, 2017, the police were sent to Ms. Klein's home at the request of her mother. Upon arriving at the home, an officer requested that Ms. Klein step outside. She declined, shutting the door on the officer. After hearing noises and fearing for Ms. Klein's safety, the officer forced his way into the home and was thereafter assaulted by Ms. Klein. At that time, she was taken into custody, and drug paraphernalia and what is believed to be marijuana was seized from the property. As a result of these allegations and the criminal charges, including the felony that I referenced, the executive director issued an emergency suspension as requested by Enforcement Counsel. Subsequently, a hearing as to the validity of the emergency suspension was held on July 26, 2017. Both the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Ms. Klein attended that hearing. The Enforcement Counsel putting into the record evidence of the arrest and the underlying allegations. Ms. Klein's only testimony at that hearing was that she had made application for the ARD program and was waiting to hear whether she was going to be accepted into that program. Notwithstanding that testimony, because the felony charge remained pending, the hearing officer's recommendation to the board is that the suspension remain in place, and that is the recommendation for the board's consideration at this time.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the suspension of Samantha Klein's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Dante?
Yeah.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
And that concludes the matters of the Office of Chief Counsel.
Yeah, okay. I thought maybe I was.
Good morning,
Proceed,
Chairman,
Steve.
members of the board. Before the board today will be one slot machine supplier, one gaming junket enterprise license renewal, one gaming-related gaming service provider, and 543 principal key gaming and non-gaming employee applicants. In addition, there will be the consideration of 18 gaming service provider applicants. The first matter for your consideration is the approval of American Gaming and Electronics, a slot machine supplier licensee. American Gaming and Electronics is a Nevada-based company that services slot machines and associated equipment. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation of the company, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with a background investigation and suitability report regarding the approval. As a result, the slot machine supplier license is ready for your consideration. I have provided you with a draft order for this entity and ask that the board consider the order to approve the slot machine license for American Gaming and Electronics.
Thank you.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the supplier license application of American Gaming and Electronics as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration is the renewal of the Gaming Junket Enterprise license for Ben's Gaming LLC. Ben's Gaming is a New Jersey-based junket company. The Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement has completed its investigation of this company, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with the background investigation and suitability report for this applicant. I have provided you with the draft order and ask that the board consider the renewal of the license for Ben's Gaming LLC.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the gaming junket enterprise license application of Ben's Gaming LLC as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration is the approval of a gaming-related gaming service provider certification for Double Backjack LLC, doing business as Second Chance Blackjack. Double Backjack is based in Pittsburgh and offers a game variety in blackjack. The Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement has completed its investigation of this company, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with the background investigation and suitability report for this applicant. I have provided you with the draft order for this entity and ask that the board consider the approval of a gaming-related gaming service provider certification for Double Backjack LLC, doing business as Second Chance Blackjack.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the gaming-related gaming service provider certification application of Double Backjack LLC as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration is the approval of one principal license. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with the proposed order for the one principal. I ask that the board consider the order approving this license.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the issuance of principal employee licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next, there are temporary principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order regarding the issuance of temporary licenses for one principal and 6 key employees. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of temporary principal and key employee credentials as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
In addition, there are gaming permits and non-gaming registrations. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a list of 352 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted temporary or full occupation permits, and 149 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted registrations under the authority delegated to the Bureau of Licensing. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the order.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of gaming employee occupation permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Also, there are recommendations of denial for one gaming employee applicant and one non-gaming employee applicant. In each case, the applicant was notified he or she was being recommended for denial and failed to request a hearing within the specified time frame. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with the orders addressing the applicants who the Office of Enforcement Counsel has recommended for denial. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the denials.
Enforcement Council continues to request denial in each instance.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board deny the gaming and non-gaming employee applications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration are withdrawal requests for key gaming and non-gaming employees. In each case, the permit or registration is no longer required. For today's meeting, I have provided the order with a list of 1 key, 25 gaming employees, and 6 non-gaming employees for withdrawal for approval. I ask that the board consider the order approving the list of withdrawals.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Chairman, I move that the board approve the withdrawals as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next, we have an order to certify the following gaming service providers: the Norwood Company, Chopstick Asian Cuisine Incorporated, Villa Pizza of Pennsylvania. I ask that the board consider the order approving these gaming service providers for certification.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider certification as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And finally, for your consideration, are gaming service provider registrations. The Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order and an attached list of 15 registered gaming service provider applicants. I ask that the board consider the order registering these gaming service providers.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the applications for gaming service provider registration as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you.
It's the Bureau of Licensing matter.
Thank you, Sean. Office of Enforcement Counsel.
The Office of Enforcement Counsel will present 23 matters today for the board's consideration, consisting of 5 consent agreements, 2 revocations, 2 suspensions, and 14 involuntary exclusions. The first matter on OEC's part of the agenda is for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Category 1 licensee Downs Racing LP doing business as Mohegan Sun Pocono. The consent agreement will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel John Crow. I see Mohegan representatives are present at this time. I request any individuals that are not licensed attorneys in the Commonwealth, please stand and be sworn
Who are licensed attorneys.
and introduce themselves into the record.
Good morning, board members. It's Mark Stewart, STEWART, with Eckert Siemens. With me is Michael Epps.
Michael Epps. I am the new Vice President of Legal and Compliance at Mohegan Sun Pocono.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Crow.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. John Crow, CROHE, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement reached between Mohegan Sun Pocono and the Office of Enforcement Counsel regarding an incident wherein the board's regulations governing the game of poker and the requirement to notify casino compliance when a deck is discovered to contain the incorrect cards were violated. On July 4th, 2016, a table games dealer discovered two 8 of clubs in the same deck while dealing poker. The dealer stopped play and reported this incident to the lead supervisor. The dealer further reported that the deck had been in play at multiple tables. The deck had been in play for 4 hours and 25 minutes before the error was discovered. The lead supervisor collected the deck, negated the hand, and returned all bets from the hand to the players at the table. It was then discovered that the compromised poker deck was also missing a 9 of spades. The lead supervisor reported the incident to the poker shift manager by way of email and advised the lead supervisor, who relieved him at the coinciding shift change of the matter. The subsequent lead supervisor immediately examined all replacement decks and ensured that they were constructed properly. A card, dice, tiles discrepancy report was not generated and notice was never given to casino compliance. This incident was not discovered by the board until July 23rd, 2016, when a patron sent a letter of complaint to Mohegan Sun and copied this board. The Office of Enforcement Counsel and Mohegan Sun Pocono respectfully request that the board approve this consent agreement and stipulations of settlement, which would require Mohegan Sun Pocono to implement policy and procedures to prevent further similar incidents, and that Mohegan Sun Pocono pay a civil penalty of $25,000 as well as $2,500 for costs incurred by the board staff in connection with investigations into this matter.
Comments?
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, as was expressed by Mohegan Sun Pocono in August, it is deeply regretful about this situation, particularly the lack of reporting to the appropriate agencies within the board. It has taken steps to address that, to reemphasize and stress the very, very importance of that type of timely reporting, and we stand before you for questions if you have any.
Are there any questions from the board?
I do. So a patron filed the complaint, not on that same day, but some time period after. What was the time period after the compromised deck?
It was approximately 3 weeks after the incident.
So how did the patron 3 weeks later know about it?
The patron was one of the players at the table when the incident occurred, felt as if he should have been compensated sometime thereafter, and then sent in.
So there was discussion on the day that the event, the deck was compromised.
It was discovered and corrected, yes. The deck was taken out of.
It was discovered by the patron. I'm having a hard time following it. So the patron's there. There's a compromised deck. How did he or she on that day realize there was a compromised deck?
It was apparent to the patrons as the game of poker when the cards came out. The players realized that 2 of the same cards should not be in the deck. So it was witnessed by the patrons at the table, and the then dealer realized simultaneously.
So then it took 3 weeks for that patron, one of which were many at the table, then to file a complaint.
That's correct.
Okay.
And Mohegan Sun Pocono has reached out both verbally and in writing to apologize to all the patrons who were at the table, including the one who filed the complaint.
Gotcha.
Are there other questions?
I do have a couple of questions. Obviously, you've indicated you've emphasized what your policies are, re-emphasize them. But you also said, Mr. Stewart, that you took other steps. Could you let us know what those other steps were?
Well, there was individual discipline of the employees, as I believe was discussed at the August meeting. Records of discussion were held, and the appropriate, progressive discipline measures were implemented.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Don't want to beat a dying horse, but I have to say, I think everybody here on the board recognizes mistakes happen, and that's not what this is about. It's a failure, obviously, by Downs to follow proper procedure, which undermines the integrity of the operations at your casino and undermines confidence in this board. So hopefully we won't be seeing this again.
Absolutely not, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Downs Racing LP as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Category 2 licensee Holdings Acquisition Co. LP doing business as Rivers Casino. Representatives from Rivers Casino are present, and at this time I would request that those individuals introduce themselves for the record, and that anyone not an attorney please stand and be sworn.
John Donnelly, appearing on behalf of the Rivers Casino.
Danielle Cisneros, Cisneros, Senior Counsel, Rivers Casino.
Lorraine Davis, Director of Compliance.
Ms. Davis, could you please be sworn?
Swear affirm the testimony you're about to give
I do.
The consent agreement will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel Tamara Haken.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Tamara Haken, Haken. This proposed consent agreement involves a violation of table games procedures at Rivers Casino. On January 3rd, 2017, the Rivers Director of Compliance self-reported to the Bureau of Casino Compliance that 5 tournaments had been held without being submitted for scheduling approval. BCC completed a compliance review on January 4th, 2017, and concluded that Rivers Casino failed to submit the 2017 poker tournament schedule to the Bureau of Gaming Operations and Executive Director for review and approval prior to holding the 5 tournaments between January 1st and January 3rd, 2017. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board approve this consent agreement between the parties. The terms of the settlement include that within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, Rivers Casino shall pay a civil penalty of $20,000. Also within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, Rivers shall pay the board $2,500 for the costs incurred by OEC, BIE, and other related staff in connection with this matter. If you have any questions, we would be happy to address them at this time.
Thank you. Any comments?
Yes, thank you. That accurately reflects where we are. I want to emphasize this was a scheduling error, and that means we had filed, my client had filed procedures on these poker tournaments, and they were on file, and the actual procedures were not changed. The company was without the management at that time, and Ms. Davis was very green, having just come to the property. The failure was to alert the gaming board as to the schedule when these particular events would take place. And that's a failure, but the procedures were approved. The game was, the tournaments were played in the appropriate manner, and we self-reported it.
Any other questions from the board?
If I may, Mr. Donnelly, so what happened here was somebody who should have done it didn't do it because of lack of information, lack of knowledge. Would that be an accurate statement?
They dropped the ball. The table game manager should have called up the local folks and said, we're having, the tournament, I don't know what they call it, Tournament X that's already been filed. We've been running these for a year and a half, and I think continue. We're going to run a couple of them in January, 5 of them in January. He failed to make that phone call.
Actually, I have a question. Enforcement Council. 5 tournaments were held without us being notified. If there's a tournament, I'm just for my own education, would this be something that our CCRs would be aware of just from being there?
Yes, they would.
But they wouldn't necessarily know whether or not it had been properly scheduled?
Because the tournaments, as Mr. Donnelly said, were previously approved, the procedures and everything, everything about the tournament was fine, and that's what the CCR's, their first inclination to be would be to check. I assume they assumed that Rivers would have made a phone call or sent an email to gaming operations and to the executive director saying, we're running these tournaments on these dates.
Okay.
That never happened.
Okay.
And Rivers self-reported that information to BCC.
Got it. Thanks, Cyrus. Other questions for the board? If not, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Holdings Acquisition Company, LP, as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a second consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Holdings Acquisition Co. LP doing business as Rivers Casino. Assume the same individuals. This matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel Sarah Colasar.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. Sarah Colasar, Kolesar with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The proposed consent agreement involves 3 self-exclusion violations which occurred at the Rivers Casino. On October 23, 2016, YL, a self-excluded individual, went to the Rivers Casino and actively gamed for approximately 4 hours and 35 minutes. During this time, YL was issued a player's card and registered for a table games tournament by casino personnel. YL's presence in the casino was discovered on October 24, 2017. On July 29, 2016, DA, a self-excluded individual, went to the Rivers Casino and actively gamed for approximately 80 minutes. During his time at the Rivers Casino, DA received 2 separate cash advances from the Dytronics office without being identified as a self-excluded person. DA was ultimately discovered by table games personnel, and his winnings in the amount of $5,512 were confiscated. On April 17, 2017, BW, a self-excluded individual, went to the Rivers Casino and actively gamed for approximately 8 hours and 17 minutes. During this time, BW was issued a player's card. BW's presence in the casino was discovered by casino personnel on April 19, 2017. Further, the Rivers Casino promptly reported all 3 violations to the Bureau of Casino Compliance and the Pennsylvania State Police. All 3 self-excluded individuals were issued lifetime bans from the Rivers Casino and cited for trespass by the Pennsylvania State Police. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board approve this consent agreement between the parties. The terms of the settlement include that within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, the Rivers Casino shall pay a civil penalty of $22,500. Also within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, the Rivers Casino shall pay the board $2,500 for the costs incurred by OEC, BIE, and other related staff in connection with this matter. If you have any questions, I would be happy to address them at this time.
Thank you. Any comments, please?
Thank you. Only that of the three counts, the middle one was an oversight by Dytronics, our vendor. And they did check, but the clerk who was putting in the information put in the wrong birth date. And so it came up a green that person was not barred. The others, we self-reported them, and the persons, we issued discipline and retraining in both cases.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Holdings Acquisition Company, LP, as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Category 2 licensee Sugar House HSP Gaming LP, doing business at Sugar House Casino. Representatives from Sugar House Casino are present, and at this time I request that these individuals introduce themselves for the record, and anyone who is not an attorney, please stand and be sworn.
Anthony Dilacqua, D-I-L-A-C-Q-U-A. And I need these.
Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give this morning will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
The matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel James Armstrong.
Thank you. Chairman, Commissioners, the next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement reached between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sugar House Casino regarding one incident of underage gambling involving one individual. Commissioners, on June 30th, an underage patron entered Sugar House through the north main doors with 4 other individuals who were later determined to be his brother, their parents, and his brother's girlfriend. Security requested identification from the brother, but did not request identification from the underage patron. They were all granted admission into the gaming floor. The underage patron was on the gaming floor for 40 minutes. During that time, he played a slot machine and interacted with various Sugar House personnel. In one instance, a security officer stamped his hand when he left the bar area, but did not request identification. Eventually, the underage patron and his brother attempted to buy in at a roulette game, and they were asked for identification by a table games supervisor. The brother produced valid identification, but the underage patron produced his high school ID. While the supervisor was summoning security, the underage patron left the area. The underage patron was located by security in the parking garage, where he and his parents were questioned by security officers about his age and identification. Prior to the Pennsylvania State Police arriving on the scene, the underage patron and his parents left the garage in their vehicle. The brother and his girlfriend remained at the garage and cooperated with police after they arrived, properly identifying the underage patron. It was determined that the underage patron was only 19 years of age. The underage patron was issued a formal eviction notice and a citation for being underage on the casino floor. The 3 security officers involved in the issue were issued final written warnings. Commissioners, the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sugar House Casino respectfully request that the board approve the proposed consent agreement and stipulation of settlement, which requires, amongst other things, that Sugar House pay a civil penalty in the amount of $10,000 and a fee of $2,500 for costs incurred by the Office of Enforcement Counsel and other staff involved in this investigation. Mr. Donnelly's here on behalf of Sugar House. We'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I want to make a couple points. Number one, this person was seen by 3 of our employees, Sugar House's employees, and apparently he looked over 35 because originally wasn't carded. And then he passed through another person on the floor who looked at him but thought he passed age. And then finally was caught by a supervisor on the floor who again carded him, or at that time for the first time carded him and saw that he wasn't. We issued discipline to the 2, final warning to the 2 persons who had seen him on the floor and hadn't, one the man who let him in and the person who saw him on the floor and didn't card him. And then we performed our own investigation and found out there was a 3rd person on our team who interacted with him, and we self-reported that as well. We self-reported this, and we disciplined that person. It's tough when kids come in and have fake IDs or look over age, and it pains me especially now. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but to the extent people are watching this, I think 2 things that kind of get my goat on this case. Number one, this particular underage was in with his parents, and his parents allowed him in, walked him through, and then left the facility before the state police could come. And apparently are going to have no consequences of this, whereas our guards are getting severe consequences. And that irks me. And I'm not irked at this body, I'm irked at the parents, and I'm trying to send a message to the legislature as well. The second thing is this particular underage left before the state police came and will apparently suffer no consequences, yet our working guards suffer consequences. And I urge the legislature, as we have in the past, and I know you have, this board has too, to have more stringent sanctions on underage kids. For example, in Jersey, an underage kid who enters a casino and is caught loses his or her license for 6 months. And that's been an effective deterrent in Jersey, because the word gets out that if you get caught in a casino, you're going to lose your license.
By license, you mean license to
driver's
drive?
license, yeah, for 6 months. And I've had a number of people, not 100, but I've had a number of clients call me up and say, oh, my son lost his license, can you help? Can you go to municipal court and get it back? And the first, I tried once, and it's no-go. The courts enforce it, bang, your license is gone, and that's a deterrent. And so I would urge through this vehicle and the TV, I'd urge the legislature to do something about this. It just isn't fair to let underage kids are going to try to get in. We are all kids at once. The casinos don't want them. They're absolutely no value to us. And yet the people who get punished are, and we're big boys, the casino's big boy, but I hate to see some guard who looked at a kid and thought he was overage suffer consequences because of that, and the kids and their parents especially to walk away. End of speech. Thank you for enduring.
Okay, thank you. Are there any
They're pretty busy across the street, but I'm sure somebody's listening.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board on this? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sugar House HSP Gaming LP as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Commissioner Ryan, thank you for your service. I enjoyed appearing before you. I'm glad, Commissioner Joy, you told us all about him. I didn't know that. So good luck in your future.
Thank you very much.
Just for the record, that motion was adopted.
Next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Mr. Peter Jeanette. If Mr. Jeanette or his attorney is present, please come forward. The matter will be presented by Senior Enforcement Counsel Dustin Miller.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has entered into a consent agreement with Peter Jeanette, prepared for the board's consideration at this time. This consent agreement arises from an incident at Parks East from October 21st, 2016. In that incident, Mr. Jeanette crafted a handwritten note and left the note on a table that was being set up for an NAACP event at Parks East that evening. The content of the note threatened physical violence and contained a racial epithet. A Parks Casino guest services manager found the note while setting up for the event. The Parks Casino Security Department provided additional security for the event that evening, and no incident occurred at the event. Mr. Jeanette was identified as the author of the note the next day. For his actions, Mr. Jeanette was charged by Pennsylvania State Police with ethnic intimidation, harassment, and 4 counts of disorderly conduct. On May 10, 2017, Mr. Jeanette pleaded guilty to ethnic intimidation, harassment, and 2 counts of disorderly conduct. Mr. Jeanette was sentenced to 18 months of probation and payment of court costs. Mr. Jeanette has been permanently banned from Parks Casino and indefinitely banned from Parks Racing for his actions. Since this incident, Mr. Jeanette has entered a racial sensitivity program. On May 23, 2017, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Jeanette on the board's list of excluded persons. Prior to a hearing on the matter, the parties have entered into a consent agreement to settle this outstanding matter. The terms of the agreement include a provision that Mr. Jeanette shall be placed on the exclusion list for 1 year. Mr. Jeanette is also required to complete the racial sensitivity class that he has entered into and to provide evidence of the program's completion to the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Mr. Jeanette may file a petition for his removal from the exclusion list anytime after 1 year. Mr. Jeanette is barred from filing a petition for early removal from the exclusion list. The Office of Enforcement Counsel will not object to said petition if Mr. Jeanette has not been convicted of any gambling or gaming-related crimes, has not entered or attempted to enter any Pennsylvania casinos, and has provided the required paperwork evidencing his completion of the racial sensitivity program. Mr. Jeanette is represented by counsel in this matter. However, Mr. Jeanette's counsel has indicated to the Office of Enforcement Counsel that he will not be in attendance today. But I'm available to answer any questions you may have on this matter. Otherwise, I would request that the board consider a motion to approve the consent agreement as described.
Are there any questions or comments from the board on this matter? I have a motion.
Yeah. Just speaking for myself, it's a disgusting act. It's unacceptable, and it can't be tolerated. Therefore, I move that the board reject the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Peter Jeanette as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next four matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed complaints seeking the suspension of 2 non-gaming employee registrations and revocation of 2 gaming employee occupation permits issued by the board. Each complaint has been filed with the board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the person named in each complaint. The person named in each complaint failed to respond within 30 days, as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment and properly served the same upon each named individual. Therefore, the facts in each complaint are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for board consideration. In each instance, we will provide a brief summary of the facts and request the appropriate board action.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Benjamin Farrell, F-E-R-R-E-L-L. The next matter for your consideration is the complaint to suspend Megan DeLeandro's gaming employee occupation permit. On May 6, 2017, Ms. DeLeandro was arrested by the Darby Township Police Department and charged with 1 felony and 2 misdemeanor offenses after officers during a traffic stop found Ms. DeLeandro visibly impaired and in possession of a white substance suspected to be cocaine. Those charges remain pending. Additionally, on February 11, 2017, Ms. DeLeandro was involved in a vehicle accident in which she struck another vehicle and fled the scene after checking with the driver of the vehicle and giving that driver false insurance information. On March 23, 2017, the Lansdowne Borough Police Department arrested and charged Ms. DeLeandro with 2 felony, 5 misdemeanor, and 2 summary offenses. The felony counts were withdrawn at a preliminary hearing, and the remaining charges remain pending. At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order suspending Ms. DeLeandro's gaming employee occupation permit.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the suspension of Megan DeLeandro's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman, fellow board members. John Pokoneski, P-O-K-I-N-I-E-W-S-K-I, the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the suspension of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Michael Giannetti. Mr. Giannetti was arrested and criminally charged with 1 felony, 9 misdemeanors, and 19 summaries resulting from Mr. Giannetti trying to elude police in his vehicle. At this time, OEC requests that the board suspend the non-gaming employee registration issued to Mr. Giannetti.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the suspension of Michael Giannetti's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning again, Chairman, members of the board. Tamara Haken, H-A-K-E-N, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the revocation of the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Caitlin Goodman. Ms. Goodman was previously employed as a slot attendant at Hollywood Casino until May of 2017. On April 12, 2017, Ms. Goodman was observed skimming abandoned vouchers and stealing toques. Ms. Goodman was terminated after confessing to the behavior. OEC requests that the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Caitlin Goodman be revoked.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Caitlin Goodman's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the revocation of the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Trey Brown. Mr. Brown was previously employed as a table games dealer at Hollywood Casino until May of 2017. Between April 5th and May 19th, 2017, Mr. Brown conducted a fraudulent scheme with the help of a patron accomplice to deprive money from Hollywood Casino by cheating during the performance of his job duties. Mr. Brown was terminated and arrested by the Pennsylvania State Police and charged with 2 felony counts and 128 misdemeanor counts related to his fraudulent scheme. Mr. Brown's charges remain pending in the Dauphin County Court of Common Pleas. As a result, OEC requests that the gaming employee occupation permit issued to Trey Brown be revoked.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Trey Brown's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The remaining matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed petitions seeking the involuntary exclusion of individuals whose presence in a licensed facility are inimical to the interests of the Commonwealth and are licensed gaming therein. In each instance, the petition for exclusion has been filed with the Board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the petition. The individual named in the petition failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment in each instance and properly served the same upon each named individual. Therefore, all facts in each petition are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, if the board orders the proposed exclusion, each individual's photo, personal identifiers, and a summary of the inimical conduct will be placed on the board's public website.
Good morning once again. Tamara Haken with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next 2 matters on the agenda for the board's consideration arise from the same events. I will present the facts and then request the individual actions if I may. Between April 5th and May 19th, 2017, Trey Brown and Nathaniel Stazuski conducted a fraudulent scheme to deprive money from Hollywood Casino. Trey Brown was a dealer and Nathaniel Stazuski was a patron. They fraudulently engaged in play whereby Mr. Brown would signal to Mr. Stazuski what numbers to bet on and then read out dice values in SICBO that were not the values appearing on the dice, hiding the actual values from view. Mr. Brown was terminated, and both Mr. Brown and Mr. Stazuski were arrested by the Pennsylvania State Police, and Mr. Brown was charged with 2 felony counts and 128 misdemeanor counts. And Mr. Stazuski was charged with 3 felony counts and 12 misdemeanor counts related to this fraudulent scheme. Both men's charges remain pending in the Dauphin County Court of Common Pleas. As a result of these events, OEC requests first that the board issue an order placing Trey Brown on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Trey Brown to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All
Make a-
opposed?
Sorry.
The motion's adopted.
I'll
Commissioner
make a
Jewell?
comment. One of the most fundamental things that this board does and that Title IV requires is a prescription that we ensure that the gaming in this Commonwealth remains fair. What we've just heard described is a heinous violation of that. And we all should understand, as we've seen here today, that there are both criminal and civil consequences that are quite serious when you violate that prescription.
Thank you. Any other comments? Proceed.
Further, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Nathaniel Stazuski on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Nathaniel Stazuski to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the involuntary exclusion of Jesse Forey. On 2 occasions, May 28th and June 3rd, 2017, Mr. Forey stole credit vouchers belonging to other patrons. As a result, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Jesse Forey on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the addition of Jesse Forey to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the involuntary exclusion of Alfredo Lopez. On both February 20th and 22nd, 2017, Mr. Lopez, with the assistance of a companion and fellow patron, deprived Hollywood Casino of a purple $500 chip from the float area of a roulette table by taking a chip and then immediately handing it off to his companion, who took it to the cashier cage to cash it out. As a result, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Alfredo Lopez on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Alfredo Lopez to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the involuntary exclusion of Alejandro Salmaran. On May 9th, 2017, Mr. Salmaran cheated by pass posting a bet at Hollywood Casino while he was awaiting a formal arraignment for criminal charges related to previous cheating activity he had engaged in on November 22nd, 2016 at Mohegan Sun Casino. As a result, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Alejandro Salmaran on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Alejandro Salmaran to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Michael Rowland, ROL A&D with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next 5 matters on the agenda arise from the same fact pattern, and each involves a request to place the individual on the involuntary exclusion list. On February 5th, 2017, underage patrons Wendy Reyes Chahon and Maria Ramirez Guevara, both age 19, gained access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino by providing the legitimate identifications of Estefani Benalcazar, age 22, and Leticia Navarro, age 24. Once the underage patrons were successfully on the gaming floor, Kevin Valiz, age 24, retrieved the identifications from them and returned the identifications to Ms. Benalcazar and Ms. Navarro, so they too could gain access to the floor. Underage patron Wendy Reyes Chahon was on the gaming floor for approximately 39 minutes before being approached by security. Underage patron Maria Ramirez Guevara was on the gaming floor for approximately 13 minutes before being approached by security. Ms. Reyes Chahon and Ms. Ramirez Guevara were both charged by the Pennsylvania State Police with carrying a false identification card. Ms. Benalcazar, Ms. Navarro, and Mr. Valiz were not criminally charged. The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Estefani Benalcazar on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Estefani Benalcazar to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Ms. Benalcazar may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Wendy Reyes Chahon on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Wendy Reyes Chahon to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Ms. Reyes Chahon may petition for removal from the list after her 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Maria Ramirez Guevara on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the addition of Maria Rivera Guevara to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Ms. Ramirez Guevara may petition for removal from the list after her 22nd birthday.
May I have a motion? Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor?
Second.
Second. There we go. We got it. We got it. Yeah, I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
There we go.
Matters now before the board to consider the placement of Leticia Navarro on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Leticia Navarro to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. And I further move that Ms. Navarro may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
And the matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Kevin Valise on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Kevin Valise to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
I further move that Mr. Valise may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
You second both, I believe. Yes. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next is a request to place Brian Thomas Leone on the involuntary exclusion list. On December 26, 2016, underage patron Brian Thomas Leone gained access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino with the use of a fraudulent identification. He was on the gaming floor for approximately 19 minutes and gamed at one blackjack table for approximately 15 minutes. Mr. Leone was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police with carrying a false identification card, to which he's already entered a guilty plea. The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Brian Thomas Leone on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Brian Thomas Leone to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Leone may petition for removal from the list after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next is a request to place Ahmad Awadallah on the involuntary exclusion list. On April 2nd, 2017, underage patron Ahmad Awadallah attempted and failed to gain access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino with the use of a fraudulent identification. Mr. Awadallah was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police with carrying a false identification card, and the matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Ahmad Awadallah to the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Ahmad Awadallah to the BGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Awadallah may petition for removal from the list after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter for your consideration is a petition to place Nicholas Karagianis on the board's involuntary exclusion list. On April 7th, 2017, Mr. Karagianis, while under 21 years of age, used a fraudulent driver's license to obtain a casino access card at Valley Forge Casino Resort, access the gaming floor, game, and consume alcoholic beverages. The Pennsylvania State Police charged Mr. Karagianis with 1 count each of underage on the gaming floor, underage gaming, carrying a false identification, and purchasing alcohol by a minor in a licensed facility. On May 1st, 2017, Mr. Karagianis pled guilty to the gaming-related charges. On May 22nd, 2017, Mr. Karagianis pled guilty to carrying false identification. At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Nicholas Karagianis on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Nicholas Karagianis to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Karagianis may petition for removal from the list after his 22nd birthday.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
My apologies on the last one, Benjamin Farrell, the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next matter for your consideration is a petition to place Brandon Abner on the board's involuntary exclusion list. On April 14th, 2017, Mr. Abner stole $75 in chips from patrons and attempted to steal chips from other patrons at Valley Forge Casino Resort. On May 10th, 2017, the Pennsylvania State Police charged Mr. Abner with 1 count of theft by unlawful taking and 3 counts of attempted theft by unlawful taking. The theft by unlawful taking charge remains pending, and the remaining charges have been dismissed. At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Brandon Abner on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, comment. I was sleeping at the switch on the last second because all I kept thinking was here's 23 young people who we have now put on a public website whose chances when they're looking for their next job and their employer or potential employer Googles their name are going to pop up, and that may be something that prohibits them from getting perhaps their first professional job. And I just think this matter is serious, so to the extent that anybody is watching and we can send that message that there are consequences beyond what you might think for something that just seems like a fun night and maybe getting away with getting on the casino, it's really just not worth it. And those are my comments before we make this last vote to place someone on the exclusion list.
Thank you. That event may have a motion.
You may. Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the addition of Brandon Abner to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
That concludes our business.
Thank you very much, Cyrus. That concludes today's agenda, today's meeting. Our next scheduled public meeting will be held on Wednesday, November 8th in this room. The meeting will begin at 10 o'clock in the morning. May I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you, one and all.